suppression, sometimes we need receptors to be quiet. Our success as a species demands that our sensory system accentuates the changes of stimuli. Sensory system adaptation, accessory structures, and neural connections can all suppress a constant stimuli. Sensory structures reduce the level of input. Relevant mechanisms change the intensity of the stimuli before it reaches the receptor. So we close our eyelids to decrease the amount of light entering the eye as an example. Neural connections descend from the brain to lower stations in the sensory system. This is known as top-down process, and it's when higher centers in the pain system send axons down the spinal cord to inhibit incoming pain signals. Pathways, or successive levels of the nervous system, process sensory information. Sensory information goes from the sensory surface to the highest levels of the brain, each having its own distinct pathway or hierarchy. A sensory pathway is then a chain of neural connections from sensory receptor cells to the cortex. The most complex aspects of sensory information takes place in the cerebral cortex. Most sensory modalities go through the thalamus before reaching the cerebral cortex. Each sensory modality is sent to a separate division of the thalamus. Smell, however, bypasses the thalamus and goes directly to the cortex. Receptive field. What turns on a particular receptor? A receptive field is a region of space in which a stimulus will alter the neuron's firing rate. To determine the receptive field, we record the neuron's electrical responses to a variety of stimuli to see what makes the activity of the cell change from its resting rate. Somatosensory receptor fields have either an excitatory center with an inhibitory surrounding or vice versa, as seen up there with the cattail. This makes it easier to detect edges and discontinuities on the objects that we feel. The receptive field changes as its neurons combine to produce information. So, receptive fields in the cerebral cortex. Different cortical regions process information differently and make different contributions to perceptual experiences. So, our primary sensory cortex is one of the cortical maps that is designated as the primary sensory cortex. This is the region of the cortex that receives most of the information about the modality. Second sensory cortex is the other cortical maps, which receive direct projections from the primary sensory cortex for the modality. The primary somatosensory cortex, known as S1, is found in the postcentral gyrus, and it receives touch and pain information from the opposite side of the body. Sensitive areas tend to send information to larger areas than less sensitive areas do. Secondary somatosensory cortex, or S2, maps both sides of the body in registered overlay, so the right and left arm occupy the same part of the map, and it receives direct projections from primary somatosensory cortex. Attention. How do we notice some stimuli but not others? Attention can either be a top-down process or be pulled by a sudden dramatic event, such as a loud noise. Attention is also known as selective awareness. So in sensory processes, the posterior parietal lobe plays a key role in attention. The cingulate cortex is also implicated in attention. This lies dorsal to the corpus callosum. Sensory systems influence one another. Humans detect a visual signal more accurately when accompanied by a sound from the same space. Polymodal provides a mechanism for intersensory interactions. The use of one sensory system influences perception derived from another sensory system. This is also seen in synesthesia, is when a stimulus in one modality evokes an additional perception in another modality. So basically, it's when you see a letter and it evokes a color. This is described in further detail on box 8.1. Touch. Many perceptions blend together. It's important to remember, though, that touch is not just touch. Careful studies of skin sensations reveal qualitatively different sensory experiences. This is seen in the 3 layers of the skin. The thickness of said layer varies over body structure. The epidermis is the outermost layer of skin, and it is the thinnest layer. The dermis is the middle layer of skin, and it is composed of nerve fibers and a network of connective tissue and blood vessels. The hypodermis is the innermost layer of skin. It is an anchor for muscles, and it contains the pachynian corpuscle and helps shape the body. Light touch is detected by 4 highly sensitive tactile or touch receptors. The first one is the Pacinian corpuscle. I'm sorry, I can't say that. And it is found in vibration. It activates fast adapting fibers with large receptive fields. Then we have Messner's corpuscle. It is responsible for light touch, and it is fast adapting mechanoreceptors with small receptive fields. Then we have Merkel's disc, which is seen in fine touch, and it is slow adapting receptors with small receptive fields. Then we have Ruffini's ending, which is seen in stretching, and it is a slow adapting receptors with large receptive fields. Most of our ability to feel an object we touch comes from Messner's corpuscle and Merkel's disc. Both Merkel's discs and Messner's corpuscle respond to edges on a surface due to piezo 2. Piezo 2 responds to mechanical stretch by opening channels to let cations in to depolarize the cell. Light touch receptors send information very rapidly to the CNS. This is just a really quick diagram showing the different types of light touch and what they do, and then on the bottom in 8.2 it shows what fibers are linked to receptors in the CNS. So moving on to the dorsal column system, it's important to remember the process, which is shown in the diagram at the top of the page. Basically, it says that touch receptors send their axons to the spinal cord, where they enter the dorsal horn and turn upward, traveling to the brain along the spinal cord's column of white matter, known as the dorsal column system. Afterwards, axons go to the brain stem to the dorsal column nuclei in the medulla. The axons then cross the midline to the opposite side of the brain and go to the thalamus. The signal is then directed to the primary somatosensory cortex. The skin surface can be divided into bands corresponding to the spinal nerves that carry axons from the different regions. This is known as the dermatome, and it is the strip of skin innervated by articular spinal nerve. This evolved from our four-legged ancestors, so it makes more sense to look at it from that point of view, which is seen in the diagram on the top of page 246. And then it's important to keep in mind that there is a moderate amount of overlap in this. And that is everything. Thank you.